Okay, welcome. Let's try this again. This is a quick video. I'm going to be using Python, so I'm using Spider here. The ideas apply to any language. Let's say I've written a hello program, and I say hello. Okay. Now I'm going to go with a version like this, where I have an infinite loop, and run that. Now in Spider, you can just hit this little red box to stop it, which is pretty handy, and it's going to say keyboard interrupt. So that's basically the equivalent of Alt F4ing your program without actually exiting out of Spider. Right. Why would I do that? Well, let's look at reasons why you might loop. I have an assignment here that I posted for CTS 285 where users create a calculator. You give a little menu. If they pick 5, the program should end. If they pick anything else, it's going to go into one of the sub-menus. Now, I'm in a sub-menu, and you see here, okay, I'm going to add 2 plus 2 is 4. Great. And now I get a sub-menu of repeat or go to the main menu. And then if I pick repeat, then I'll do it again. So I'll keep doing that until I exit to the main menu. You'll notice here this should say 2. So there's actually an error in my requirements. And we'll talk about what do you do if someone's requirements are incorrect. How do you fix that? But that's a later topic. The point being, if I were to write this code just by, let's say, writing something like, let's say this, I'll do a loop here and say I equals 0, and while I is less than 10, you'll notice I will often switch languages in my head, which is not good. Okay, print count of I. Good. Look what I did. See, this is an infinite loop. So in this sort of setup, of course, I've got to do something like this and say I equals I plus 1. And now that's behaving the way I want it to do. Okay, now what if I do something like this and say, wow, let's say j equals 0. Okay. Now I have a loop inside of a loop. And that works the way I want it to, which is, maybe it should say something like 9 point. So it counts 0, and then it counts the 1s, and then it counts all the 2s, and so I have a loop inside of a loop. And I could repeat doing that as much as I wanted to. The point is you start to see that as you add more of these loops, I'll stop now, but I could add additional one inside of there. You start running out of space on the screen. That gets kind of annoying. And what if these loops have different reasons why they end? Say one loop is going to say I want to count to a certain amount. One loop is I want to end when they pick a certain menu option, otherwise I want to keep going. Or one is I ask them yes or no, and I keep going unless they type no. What you're going to find is you can write some code, and if you want to add one of those loops around it, well, certainly I can just take my code and I can highlight it and press tab or shift tab to move the indentation around, which is handy. But that can get a little bit messy. So I'm going to try something like this instead. And let's say here def count. And I'll just do the same thing again inside of a loop here. Okay, and say, wow, I is less than 10. I. Cool, great. Now, one thing I want to address is why does Python use this method of putting main at the bottom? Especially here because you see right now all this is doing, main is just calling count, and count's where all my work does. So why would I go through all this effort? Now, if you're writing code in Java or C# or C++, you've got lots of extra parentheses and semicolons and curly braces every time you add a new function. So you might say, I want to make as few functions as possible, and that's a fair point. But there's a reason why you want to break things into functions if naturally what you're doing is its own thing. And that's because you've now made a building block that you can use in different places. So I'm going to run this to confirm that it works the way it doesn't. Again, I made the same mistakes. This is a great way of showing you should always run your code before you continue on. So every time I add, 1 or 2 lines even, I'll often run my code. As you have written more and more code, and as you're more and more warmed up, you'll write more code before running it. But I always like to write my code in a way that I can test it out. So let's say my requirements here, and I'll just write these. Program should count 0 to 9. Then do again if user wants. Okay, great. So my requirements are to count 0 to 9, and then do it again if the user wants to do it again. So I could have done all of that at once. That's a reasonable thing to do. But I want to take the smallest piece that I could possibly do, make sure that works, and now continue on. Because now I'm going to say in here, do again if user requests it. And I'll write this as a loop like this. I'll say choice equals 1. Okay. Another thing I'll do here, I like to hit delete. A lot of times people think of delete and backspace as being identical, but backspace moves backwards while delete moves forwards. And so if I want to add an indent, I might do it by going to the end of my colon, pressing enter, and hitting delete to get the code where I want it. Cool. And now I'm going to print a little menu here and say, okay. I'll fix my typos. You're going to find typos are essentially inevitable, especially if you're trying to talk at the same time as writing code. Because you're basically trying to type Python while speaking English. It's a little difficult. Okay. And now I'll say choice equals int input. Great. So what you can see here is I've written all this code, and line 21 is the only one that actually does anything. And the rest is all of my trying to write. So even with a very simple menu, I've written, like 10% of my code is what I'm actually doing. So I could have put this code right here, but it starts to get overshadowed. What I want to think about is I'm doing 2 things. One is I'm writing a program to have a nice user interface the way I've been requested. And if the code is just to get things set up the way I want it, or to repeat, or so and so, I might put that in main, because main is sort of my start point. And then the actual meat of the program, which is counting, is in a separate function. All right. And I find thinking of it that way, let's see, of course, look at that. And I made another classic mistake, which is if you want to set a value, that's 1 equal sign. If you want to compare a value, that's 2 equal signs. Okay. And of course, one more mistake, which is input without parentheses is a function. Input with parentheses calls that function, which is what I wanted. Okay, so now let's repeat. And I can see this is going to repeat as many times as I want. And I'll exit. All right. That took me quite a while to work through. Again, as you warm up through the semester, this type of thing goes faster and faster. But I hope this illustrates why it's really a good idea to break the pieces of your code off into doing only one thing. So count counts, main does sort of what the leftovers, the menu stuff. I could have called it menu, but that's fine. The last thing I'll mention is just a reminder of why is it that we always put main at the end like this? Well, you'll recall in Python, def simply says this is a function. It does not call that function. And if I didn't do it this way, I could get in a situation where I need, for example, let's say if this code was up here, I can't call count until the program knows what count is. And by defining all the functions and then only starting at the very bottom, all functions in the file are defined and they're known, and it doesn't matter what order I call them in. In some languages, there's some trickiness involving functions being in the right order, and it can be kind of annoying. All right, thanks, and that's all I have for this time.